Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. Before we begin, let me remind everyone that episodes that are on platforms other than YouTube will now only be available for 90 days. Special episodes may also not be uploaded there anymore. That remains to be seen. I'll explain that at another time. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. I always forget to do that. I kind of think it's weird to do that at the beginning, but at the end, if you like it, like and subscribe. On with the show. So we are now in the fall, and I predicted that this was going to be a tough fall for the governing party, Trump's Republicans. First, we have the Epstein files. There are Republican members of Congress who want these revealed. Then there will be a threat of a government shutdown that will come at the end of September. Remember, 2 years ago, that's what brought down the then Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, and that's how we have Mike Johnson today. Then there's elections in November, and then those are expected to be bruising defeats for Republicans, and we have a referendum in California to allow new maps. It's going to be a tough fall, and once we get to the other side, December, I expect the president's approval to be lower than what it is right now, probably in the low 40s. So that's what's coming down the pike. What's going on at this moment? Well, August saw a spike in illegal border crossings. This comes as President Trump's approval on immigration is minus 1.6, so it is essentially flat. Illegal border crossings were at 4,600 in the month of July and rose to 7,200 in the month of August, a 57% surge. This was much lower than under the 4 years of border failure from Joe Biden. In July 2021, it was 212,000. In July 2022, it was 200,000. July 2023, it was 132,000. And July 2024, it was 56,000. Border agents are still reporting that they're increasingly being attacked at the U.S. border. Still, in the months of May and June, there were no illegal immigrants released into the interior of the United States, which happened regularly under President Biden. Back in the summer, when tax cuts were passed, $75 billion was given to ICE, and $46 billion was given to the Customs and Border Protection, and $12 billion more for vehicles, training, hiring, and bonuses. And I thought was really interesting is I saw a post on LinkedIn for a border agent, and they were hiring border agents in Honolulu, Hawaii, and San Juan, Puerto Rico, which I thought was really interesting that they're trying to hire border agents not anywhere near the border. So this is a cross-country operation. As for deportations, 60,000 illegal aliens remain in custody pending deportations. And CNN reports that ICE has deported nearly 200,000 people since January, and Customs and Border Protection deported 132,000 people, and there have been 17,500 self-deportations. Then that brings us to 350,000 people deported so far in the year 2025. ICE in 2014 under Obama deported 316,000, and then you have the others that are on top. So Trump is still not as bad as the so-called deporter-in-chief, as liberals called him back in 2014. However, the White House set a goal of 3,000 arrests a day, and they are currently between 1,000 and 2,000. They want 1 million a year, which they're obviously not gonna reach. And I'm thinking they might be able to get to 500,000. Maybe, which would be great, but it's still a long way off. So I've heard a lot of people say that Biden deported a lot of people too. Yes, that is true. However, more people were coming in at the time as well. Saying that Trump is failing because Biden deported more is like saying someone who's cut their spending in their personal finances but also earns a little bit less is further away from paying off their debt than someone who spends way more but also earns a little bit more. The point is the total number of illegal immigrants is dropping, not rising. That's the goal. So what are my thoughts? Well, I already gave you some of them, but I have to give credit and blame the administration where it is due. The credit is that even despite the small rise of illegal border crossings in the month of August, it is still far, far below from the Biden administration's numbers. However, the administration promised more deportations, almost double the amount of deportations as what we're getting at the moment, and they still haven't delivered. So in that respect, they are failing. And I believe the administration needs to close the door to nearly all immigrants, not just illegal immigrants, but legal immigrants. And let me explain. And I've explained this before, but I'll explain it again here. We should not accept any immigrants from Central and Latin America, from Africa, and Asia, except for Taiwan, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan. And then we should accept immigrants from Australia and Oceania, and then from Europe and Canada. And by Europe, I mean everyone except Russia and Belarus. And in my opinion, this should include refugees as well. We need to focus on our own people. There are people who are suffering from natural disasters, and think about it, hurricane season is upon us, and that are in poverty. And I think it's really interesting because I'm taking a sociology class this semester, and we're talking about poverty and racism and gender oppression and all that. I think it's ironic that the same people who want to tackle these issues also want to welcome the rest of the world here. We just cannot do both. And I think as a country, we need to focus on our own people rather than other people. And the reason I don't want to close the door entirely is that we should still reward our allies for supporting us. And those people will come to American universities. They will help fund our universities as we are entering an enrollment cliff. We do need some immigration to grow our economy because we're not producing enough people domestically. But the idea that we should be importing cheap foreign labor is a bad idea, and ironically people on the left used to oppose that because it used to drive down wages and undermine labor unions. Then there is the illegal immigration aspect to it. There are countries whose natives overstay their visas at far, far, far higher rates than other countries. Usually it's countries in Africa and Latin America. And for example, I believe it was Chad, 53% of their people overstayed their visas. 53%. That is an insane amount. It might have been more, it might have been less, but it was very, very high. And also there's the aspect of how do these people benefit America? How does someone from Somalia benefit America? That should be asked anytime an immigrant applies for a visa. How are you going to benefit the United States of America? And before we move on, the dramatic drop in illegal immigration has also threatened to shrink our population for the first time in, well, maybe forever. Pew Research and the American Enterprise Institute have a range of projections for population changes. Their high number is 115,000, and their low number is 525,000. The total number of foreign-born Americans they estimate has dropped from 53.3 million to 51.9 million in the first half of the year 2025, and this comes as U.S. birth rates are at record lows. So moving on to the next topic, speaking of Latin America and why we should not have people coming from there, I would like to talk about escalating tensions with Venezuela. So about 3 weeks ago, the president sent troops to Venezuela, not like to land on Venezuela, but sent boats to Venezuela. And last week, he struck what he called a drug-carrying boat, and 11 people were killed. There haven't been many other details. So we need a little bit of background here, and I'm going to keep it very brief. Venezuela is a country in South America. It's south of Puerto Rico, and they were once a thriving democracy and are now a dictatorship run by socialist Nicolas Maduro. And I mean actual socialist, not like Bernie Sanders socialist, like actual socialist. And the country faces high unemployment, high inflation, shortages of basically everything except oil, and then the international isolation. That might be the worst part. The prior Chavez administration in Venezuela was highly critical of George W. Bush, and Maduro has been critical of Trump. Venezuela is very close to a failing state, if it isn't already, and it's a place that people do not want to go to or live in. In terms of rankings, I would put Venezuela as only barely above Somalia, maybe even below it in some aspects. So was this strike justified? Well, it was highly controversial, and I was reading an article in the New York Times, and they said in 2020, estimates showed that 200 to 250 metric tons of cocaine flow through the country. They also said that Venezuela does not produce much cocaine on its own. Instead, they transport it. Colombia is its neighbor, and Colombia is much more stable. It used to be the other way around. Venezuela was stable, and Colombia wasn't. Now it's the other way around. Colombia is not like European level stable, but they are more stable. Other countries in the region have much more cocaine. So was this strike justified? Well, I tend to think so. Even if other countries have more cocaine that are coming here, striking Venezuela's boats is not a bad thing. I'll admit Trump probably picked Venezuela for political purposes. The U.S. Navy has been deployed as a part of a blockade. It will probably not be effective. I think it's mostly for political purposes. Effective because most of the drugs that come into the country come via the Pacific, not the Caribbean. And then as I say this as a non-interventionist, I'm very non-interventionist, I'm very isolationist. Isolationist is the idea that we should not be involved in the world affairs. That is how I believe. I believe that for the most part, things that are happening in other countries, if we have a secure border and we are a strong country, we don't need to worry about what's going on in other places. I do believe, of course, in defending our country as much as we can, and I would like to see regime change in Venezuela. I would love to see Maduro fall and for Venezuela to become a thriving democracy, but I don't think that's our job to make that happen. Then the New York Times said, as I referred to earlier, that this could be a domestic political move on the part of Trump. Many Americans in Florida and other places, they were once Cuban and Venezuelan refugees, and they tend to support Republicans, the citizens anyway. And one of the reasons Florida is not a swing state anymore, it's one of the reasons, and the administration allowed Chevron, and I believe the Biden administration did as well, to restart oil operations in Venezuela in exchange for sending illegal immigrants to Caracas, which is Venezuela's capital. And obviously, they were not happy about the decision, the people the Cuban and Venezuelan Americans. So I imagine this is a move to keep them happy. However, what I think is more chilling is that Trump, in order to justify the strike, invoked the Alien Enemies Act. And I'm not sure how he did that, if it was months ago, I believe it was. And the act is a wartime law to deport Venezuelan migrants, illegal migrants, without due process. And it was rejected by a federal court, and it may head to the Supreme Court. And if there is a conflict with Venezuela, full-scale war or otherwise, then the Trump administration in front of the Supreme Court could say, well, we're at war with Venezuela, therefore we can use this act. That's just a hypothesis that was in the article, and I buy it. I think that makes a lot of sense. So last episode, I predicted, moving on here, that Congress is going to become increasingly chaotic in the next few months. And that is already proving to be true. So Epstein's victims met with some of the House Republicans, and obviously there's going to be an attempt in Congress to push to release it. This is being led by Representative Thomas Massie. Even crazy Marjorie Taylor Greene is calling for Trump to meet with the victims. She threatened to share the names of the people allegedly connected to the abuse committed by Epstein. She said, I'll walk across that floor, referring to the House floor, and say every damn name, and I'll do that for them. And the reason why she can do this is, as a member of Congress, there's a speech and debate clause. If you're on the House floor, you can say whatever you want, no matter how defamatory it is, and you can't be sued. If she says it outside, then she can get sued. Finally, this is something that us normal people can actually agree with her on. And why don't we like Marjorie Taylor Greene? Well, she's very, very right-wing. She talked about Jewish space lasers a couple years ago. That's probably what she's most famous for. And she's also a member of QAnon, the right-wing conspiracy theory. So sometime this week, the House should be moving to release the files. We'll know more next week, or at least force the administration to do so. We have Marjorie Taylor Greene, Thomas Massie, Lauren Boebert of Colorado, Anna Pauline Luna of Florida, Eli Crane of Arizona, and many others. The question is, will the Democrats support this? Normally in a scandal like this, it would be a no-brainer. However, Democrats might have their own skeletons in the closet with this Epstein business, and they might not want that released either. However, that's up to speculation. Nobody really knows for sure. For an unknown reason, and this is what the big problem has been, for an unknown reason, our politicians have not wanted these files to become public. In other news, we are scheduled to head for a government shutdown on September 30th of this year. If no deal is reached, our government will cease non-essential operations. Is this a huge thing to panic about? No, not at the moment. We still have a few weeks to go. If you are a federal employee, obviously, you'll probably already know the drill here. If the government does shut down, you're not going to be paid for however long it takes. And the reason why that's so important, and I explained this last December, last time we had a shutdown threat, well, actually, it was the time before the last time, we had a shutdown threat, and federal employees, all 800,000 of them, maybe it's 2 million, I don't exactly know the number, they live all throughout the country. They're everywhere. They're our friends, they're our neighbors, they're our brothers, our sisters, our aunts and uncles, our sons, and daughters. They're all these people. They're not just faceless bureaucrats. And it is very important that they continue to be paid, and that's one of the big reasons the government shutdown is such a big deal. And we will see if that actually happens. I do not think there's going to be a government shutdown at this moment. However, I think what's interesting is the blame game is already beginning. Mike Johnson, who is the Speaker of the House, is saying that Democrats need to decide whether to fund the government. This is obviously not true because his party is in the majority, not the Democrats. Who's the people that decides if the governments get funded? The Republicans, not the Democrats. And what will likely most happen is a short-term funding gap to extend the deadline until a date in December, like last year. Then that date is going to come where it's going to be a week away. We're all going to panic about it, and then we'll see what happens when we get there. And I'll say Democrats are likely not to support Republicans. And the reason for that is at the very beginning of the show, back in May of 2024, they supported Mike Johnson to keep him in office, mostly because they considered him to be better than anybody else. However, I don't think that's the case anymore. I think considering all that's happened in the 18 months since then, almost 18 months, they're not gonna do that because there's no benefit to them. So why is Johnson doing this? Well, he obviously believes his party might not get his act together, and it's a preemptive move to blame someone else. There's not too much information at the moment. However, we'll have to wait at least 3 more episodes before we hit that shutdown wall. And then very lastly, RFK Jr., he is the son of Robert F. Kennedy, the candidate for president and the nephew of President Kennedy. He faced a grilling at the Senate on Friday over or maybe it was Thursday, one of those days, don't remember off the top of my head, over his actions at the CDC and other agencies, including firing their director, removing all the members of the advisory committee on the immunization practices, and replaced them with his own people. He announced, as I said last week, that he's going to announce the cause of autism, and then he seemingly wants to ban the COVID-19 vaccine completely. And Trump has kind of defended the vaccine. And I'm not going to get into this much further because we will have a dedicated episode on that sometime this fall. I'm not exactly sure when. I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks. That remains to be seen depending on when he makes his big announcement. That is it for this episode. Thank you. Hopefully that was not too quickly. Thank you for tuning in. It is very much appreciated, and I hope to see you next week. Bye-bye.